Napoleon Bonaparte was a very important man. He was the Emperor of France. This was a time of big changes in Europe. Napoleon had been fighting a lot of wars. He was good at it. His armies were famous. They won many battles. He built a huge empire. People knew his name everywhere. Some people loved him. Other people hated him. But everyone knew he had power. He was a force. He made big decisions. He changed countries. He shaped history. In 1807, things were looking pretty good for Napoleon. He had just signed a treaty. It was called the Treaties of Tilsit. This treaty ended some big conflicts. It brought a kind of peace. It also made France very strong. Napoleon was at the peak of his power. He had just defeated his enemies. He had put his brothers on thrones. He controlled a lot of Europe. He was the most powerful man on the continent, maybe in the world. So, after all that fighting and all that negotiating, a person like Napoleon might want to relax. He might want to take a break. He had been working hard. He had been planning strategies. He had been leading armies. It was tiring work, even for an emperor. So, an idea came up. A simple idea. A hunting party. This was a common thing for powerful people to do. It was a way to show off a little, it was a way to entertain guests, and it was a way to have some fun. A chance to step away from the serious business of running an empire. Napoleon loved hunting. He saw it as a good way to stay sharp. It was a test of skill. It was a way to get out in nature. He liked the challenge. He liked the excitement. He also liked to show his strength. He wanted people to see him as a leader. Even during a hunt, he liked to be successful at everything he did. So, his chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, was in charge of organizing this event. Berthier was a loyal man. He was good at his job. He knew what Napoleon liked. He wanted to make the hunt perfect. He wanted it to be memorable. He wanted it to be impressive. Berthier had a big task. He had to arrange everything. He had to find the right location. He had to make sure there were enough animals to hunt. He had to make sure the emperor had a good time. No pressure, right? Berthier decided to make it a big deal. He invited many important people. There were generals, there were dignitaries, there were other high-ranking officials. It was going to be a grand event. A lot of powerful men would be there. It was a chance for them to bond. It was a chance for them to show their loyalty to Napoleon. It was also a chance for Napoleon to show his generosity. To entertain his friends and allies. The hunt was planned for the summer. The weather would be good. The fields would be green. It sounded like a perfect day out, a nice break from all the heavy politics. A chance for everyone to enjoy themselves. A bit of sport, a bit of camaraderie. What could possibly go wrong at a simple hunting party? It was just some men, some dogs, and some animals to shoot. It should have been easy. It should have been a triumph, like most things Napoleon did. But sometimes even the most powerful man can't control everything. Sometimes small things can turn into big problems. The hunting party was set for a summer day. It was June 1807. The location was a place called Rambouillet. This was a beautiful estate. It was outside Paris. It had a big forest. It had open fields. It was a good spot for hunting. Berthier had picked it carefully. He wanted the best for the emperor. He wanted the event to go smoothly. He wanted it to be a success. But there was a problem. A small one, he thought. The number of wild rabbits at Rambouillet was not very high. A hunting party for an emperor needs a lot of game. It needs a lot of targets. You can't have an emperor go hunting and not find anything. That would be embarrassing. That would be a failure. Berthier wanted no failures. So he came up with a plan. He would get more rabbits. He would make sure there were plenty. He ordered hundreds of rabbits. He got them from all over the place. Some were bought from local farmers. Some were caught in the wild, but many of them were not really wild at all. They were tame rabbits. They had been raised in cages. They were used to people. They were used to being fed. They were not scared of humans. This detail would become very important later. But at the time, it seemed like a good solution. A simple way to guarantee a good hunt. The rabbits were brought to Rambouillet. They were put into cages. They were kept ready for the big day. Berthier and his men made sure everything was ready. They set up the hunting grounds. They made sure the emperor's carriage was comfortable. They prepared the food and drinks for the guests. They wanted every detail to be perfect. They were trying their best. They were serving their emperor. On the day of the hunt, everyone gathered. When Napoleon arrived, he was in a good mood. He was ready for some sport. His generals were there. His staff was there. The invited guests arrived too. They were all excited. It was a big event. It was a day to remember, or so they thought. The plan was simple. The rabbits would be released from their cages. Then the hunters would shoot them. They would use their shotguns, the dogs would help flush them out. It was a classic hunt setup. No one expected anything out of the ordinary. They expected a fun, successful day. The servants began to release the rabbits. They opened the cages. The rabbits were supposed to run away. They were supposed to scatter into the fields. They were supposed to become targets for the hunters. That's what wild rabbits do. They run and hide. They try to escape. That's how a hunt works. But these rabbits were different. Many of them were not wild. They were tame. They had been around people. They were not scared. They were confused. They did not run into the woods. They did not run away from the humans. They did something else entirely. Something very unexpected. Instead of running from the hunters, the rabbits turned towards them. They did not flee. They moved towards the group. Towards Napoleon. Towards his carriage. It was strange. It was not what anyone expected. The first few rabbits came closer. Then more followed. They seemed to be moving with a purpose. A purpose no one understood. The hunters and guests looked at each other. They were puzzled. This was not normal. This was not how a hunt usually goes. The air began to feel different. A little bit odd. A little bit tense. Something was not quite right. The rabbits kept coming. It was not just a few confused ones. It was a huge wave. Hundreds of them. They did not run into the fields or the woods. They turned straight towards the hunting party. Towards Napoleon and his men. It was like they were attacking. Like they were charging. At first the men laughed. They thought it was funny. A small joke. Maybe the rabbits were just curious. Maybe they were confused. But then more came. And more. They came from all sides. They surrounded the group. It was no longer funny. It was starting to get weird. The rabbits did not seem scared. They were not running away from the loud noises. They were not running from the dogs. They were coming closer and closer. It was like they saw the humans as a source of food. Or maybe as something else entirely. It was hard to tell. Their eyes seemed to be focused on the group. The chief of staff, Berthier, was there. He had organized this whole thing. He was mortified. His perfect hunt was turning into a disaster. He had tried so hard to make it special. Now, it was just strange. And a little bit scary. The rabbits swarmed. They were everywhere. They hopped onto the men's boots. They tried to climb their legs. They went under the carriages. They were moving fast. There were so many of them. It was a living, breathing carpet of rabbits. The generals tried to fight them off. They used their riding crops. They tried to shoo them away. But it was no use. The rabbits just kept coming. They were determined. They were relentless. It was an army of rabbits, and they were focused on one thing, getting to the humans. Where Napoleon was in his carriage. He was watching this unfold. He was probably annoyed. This was not what he had planned. This was not a dignified hunt. This was chaos. He was used to commanding armies. He was used to winning. But how do you win against hundreds of tiny, fluffy animals that just won't go away? Some of the rabbits even made it inside the carriage. They jumped in. They were everywhere. And Napoleon had to deal with them directly. He used his hands. He tried to push them out. It was a bizarre scene. The most powerful man in Europe fighting off rabbits in his carriage. The dogs were supposed to help. But they were confused too. They were probably trained to chase rabbits away. Not to be swarmed by them. They barked. They ran around. But they could not control the situation. The rabbits just overwhelmed them. The men started to panic a little. They were being attacked by rabbits. It sounds ridiculous, but imagine hundreds of animals coming at you. They are small, but they are many, and they just don't stop. It felt like an ambush, a furry, hopping ambush. The situation became untenable. The hunting party could not continue. It was impossible to hunt. It was impossible to even stand still. The rabbits were too many. They were too persistent. So Napoleon had to give the order. They had to retreat. The emperor and his men got back into their carriages. They tried to get away from the swarming rabbits. The drivers whipped the horses. They tried to speed off, but even as the carriages moved, rabbits were still clinging on. They were still trying to get in. It was a full-blown retreat from rabbits. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who conquered most of Europe, was forced to flee from a horde of bunnies. It was an absurd sight. It was embarrassing. It was something no one would ever forget. The hunt was a complete failure. A complete, utter, comical disaster. Berthier must have wanted the ground to swallow him whole. The retreat from the rabbits was quick, and it was undignified. Napoleon and his men left the hunting grounds. They left the swarming bunnies behind. The immediate feeling was probably a mix of shock, disbelief, and embarrassment. How could this happen? How could an emperor, surrounded by his best generals, be defeated by rabbits? It was almost too ridiculous to believe. No one spoke much on the way back. The mood must have been somber. Or maybe just filled with awkward silence. What do you say after something like that? Do you joke about it? Do you try to pretend it didn't happen? It was a very public failure. A very public humiliation. Berthier, the chief of staff, was probably beside himself. He had tried to create a perfect day, a grand event, and it had turned into a farce. He had ordered the tame rabbits, that was the mistake. He had tried too hard to guarantee success. And it had backfired spectacularly. He must have worried about Napoleon's reaction. Would he be angry? Would he punish him? Napoleon, being Napoleon, likely saw the humor in it later. Or at least he tried to. He was a proud man. But he was also practical. He knew how to manage his image. He knew this story would get out. He couldn't hide it. It was too wild, too funny. Too many people had seen it. And indeed, the story did get out fast. News traveled quickly, even back then. People loved a good story, especially a story where the mighty are brought low. A story about the great Emperor Napoleon being chased by bunnies? That was gold. It was hilarious. It was unexpected. It was a story everyone wanted to hear. It started as whispers. Then it grew louder. People told it to their friends, to their families. The story was repeated, and with each telling, it probably got a little bit more exaggerated. A little bit funnier, the rabbits probably became even more ferocious. Napoleon probably became even more flustered. That's how legends are born. The story was soon being told all over France, and then all over Europe. Napoleon's enemies probably loved it the most. It was a way to poke fun at him, to make him seem less invincible, less powerful. It showed that even the great Napoleon could be defeated, and by something as small and harmless as a rabbit. It chipped away at his formidable image. The incident stuck. It became part of Napoleon's story. People remember it even today, long after many of his actual battles and treaties are forgotten by the general public. Why did this particular event resonate so much? I think it's because it's so human. Yes, it shows a powerful person in a moment of vulnerability, in a moment of sheer absurdity. It reminds us that no matter how great someone is, they can still be caught off guard. They can still look silly, it brings them down to our level, and makes them relatable. In a strange way. Also, it's a great example of irony. The man who commands armies, who has faced down kings and emperors, is forced to retreat from a furry horde. It's the ultimate underdog story. But the underdogs are rabbits, and they didn't even mean to be underdogs. They just wanted some food. Or maybe they were just confused. The story also highlights the idea of unintended consequences. Berthier wanted a great hunt. He thought he was being clever by getting tame rabbits. He wanted to make sure there were enough targets. But his good intentions led to a disaster. A comical, historical disaster. It shows how even small decisions can have big, unforeseen outcomes. Especially when you're dealing with nature, and especially when you are dealing with very, very confused rabbits. So what's the real story behind the strange rabbit attack? Was it truly an army of bloodthirsty bunnies? Or was there a more simple explanation? I think it was simpler. It almost always is. The key thing was that many of these rabbits were not wild. They were tame, they had been raised in cages. They were used to people, they were probably used to being fed by people. When they were released, they did not see the hunting party as a threat. They did not see the humans as predators. They saw them as a source of food, or maybe just as something familiar. Something they associated with getting fed. Imagine being a rabbit. You're let out of a cage. You see a large group of people, what do? If you're wild, you run. You hide. You flee for your life, but if you're tame, if you're used to being fed by humans, you might go towards them. You might think they are going to give you food. You might think they are friendly. Or at least harmless. So the rabbits probably weren't attacking. They were probably begging. They were probably expecting a meal. Or just curious. Their behavior, which seemed aggressive to the humans, was probably just instinct. The instinct of a tame animal looking for food or comfort. The sheer number of rabbits, of course, made it look like an attack. Hundreds of small animals moving towards you can be overwhelming. It can feel threatening. Especially if you're not expecting it, if you're used to being in control, like Napoleon. This event, even with its simple explanation, tells us a lot. It tells us about human perception. The hunting party interpreted the rabbits' actions as hostile. They saw an attack. Because they were hunters, they were prepared for a fight, even if it was just against animals. Because they were ready for a certain kind of interaction. When the interaction was different, they reacted with surprise and then panic. It also shows how powerful people can be vulnerable. Napoleon was an emperor. He commanded vast armies. He changed the map of Europe, but he could not command these rabbits. He could not control them. He was, for a moment, helpless, and that's a powerful image. It breaks down the idea of absolute power. It shows the limits of human control over nature, even human-raised nature. The story also reminds us of how history is made and how legends are formed. A simple misunderstanding, a group of tame rabbits looking for food. It becomes Napoleon's army defeated by a horde of killer rabbits. The truth is often less dramatic, but the story is much more fun. This tale has lasted for centuries. It's one of the most famous anecdotes about Napoleon. More famous in some ways than many of his actual military victories or political maneuvers. Why? Because it's so relatable, it's funny, it's unexpected, it shows the human side of a historical giant. The smallest things can have the biggest impact on a story. A simple hunting party meant to be a relaxing break became a lasting legend. It became a moment where the most powerful man in Europe was made to look utterly foolish. And it wasn't because of an enemy army, it wasn't because of a political rival, it was because of a lot of very confused, very tame rabbits. So did Napoleon's army lose to a horde of rabbits? In a very literal sense, yes. They retreated, they fled the field, but it wasn't a military defeat, it was a comedy of errors. It was a strange, unforgettable moment in history, a moment where nature, or rather mismanaged nature, had the last laugh. And it's a story that continues to make people smile, centuries later. It's a good reminder that even the biggest figures in history have their funny, awkward, and completely unexpected moments. It shows that sometimes even emperors can be outsmarted by a bunch of bunnies.